Welcome back, and hope you had a chance to stretch and grab some food. Our afternoon session brings some very exciting conversations on social media, algorithms, privacy, and much more. Just a reminder that the Zoom chat will be open, so you can pose questions to the panelists after their presentations, and we'll be holding a Q&A either at the end of the session or may take some questions right after the presentation, depending on time. And if you're a Twitter person, you can use the hashtag #TorontoSRI to tweet about the conference. This session is now going to be moderated by Morgan McInnes, a PhD candidate at U of T's Department of Political Science and is also an SRI graduate fellow. So over to you, Morgan.
Thank you, Asmita. So as our first session this morning was focused on the theme of technology's effect on public health, the common thread for this afternoon's panel will be technology's potential effect on the information environment and what you might call the epistemic health of society. We'll hear presentations on how novel technologies can facilitate better methods for generating, gathering, and storing information, as well as how technologies may erode trust to suboptimal levels or may even exacerbate unwarranted trust and present epistemic risks in that regard. As before, we will have 4 presentations. First, we'll hear from Yisheng Li at the Ted Rogers School of Management on his paper, Algorithmic Homophily, Conspiracy Theory and Social Media, followed by Alice Huang from U of T's Department of Philosophy on subjective calibration and the meta-expertise of experts. And finally, Alexander Brechelov from the Donnelly Center for Cellular and Biomolecular Research, again at U of T, on trustworthy NLP tools for scientific document analysis. As with this morning's session, our plan is to run through all presentations in sequence and then have a designated discussion period at the end. If any presentation does not take up its fully allotted time, we might have the opportunity to present questions immediately after. Otherwise, you can write your questions for presenters in the chat window and we will record them and return to them at the end. So without further ado, I think we can turn the floor over to our first presenter of the day, Yisheng Li. Holds a master's degree in data analytics and is currently pursuing a PhD in digital enterprise and social media at Toronto Metropolitan University. His primary research interest is in computational social sciences. Specifically, he is investigating conspiracy theories on social media platforms through the lens of homophily and theories in cognitive science. Yisheng, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you for having me. So can everybody hear me? Cool, so now I'm gonna share my screen. So hello everyone, I'm so delighted to be here. My name is Yisheng Li. I'm a PhD student at Toronto Metropolitan University, previously known as Ryerson University. So today my presentation title is Algorithmic Homophily, Conspiracy Theory and Social Media. This is from a short research in progress paper which I submitted to International Conference of Information Systems 2022. So it's currently under review. It's a conceptual paper that consists of a selective literature review and a future research agenda. So let me kick off with a snapshot of a rather elaborate network of conspiracy theory. As you can see, at the center, John Podesta, he was Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman in the 2016 US presidential election. His email was hacked by Russians. So thousands of emails were subsequently leaked to WikiLeaks. So John Podesta loves cooking. He's an Italian American. So naturally, his emails often touched on the keyword pizza. The QAnon conspiracy theory picked up that seemingly trivial detail and falsely claimed that a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. called Call Me Ping Pong, owned by this gentleman, James Alafitas, has a secret basement for child sex trafficking and Satanism, orchestrated by a cabal of prominent Democrat pedophiles, including Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. A QAnon follower bought into this story and opened fire at Call Me Ping Pong. By the way, there is no basement. So I'm a computational social science researcher who stumbled upon conspiracy theories. So my questions are the following. How did this person get radicalized? And more generally, why are people so prone to conspiracy theory? I believe homophily is one very plausible explanation. You may hear of a famous adage, birds of a feather flock together. Its intellectual origin can be traced to ancient Greek, the likes of Aristotle and Plato. As a seminal paper simply put, similarity breeds connection. So homophily is essentially a mechanism of building social ties with like-minded folks. You can think of it as a social tribe of people who shares same values, beliefs, or worldviews. Let's say people who buy into conspiracy theory. So why is homophily such a powerful force shaping our perceptions of conspiracy theory? Well, we humans tend to distinguish us from them, which not only helps build trust with in-group members, but also drive divisions between out-group members, especially in post-truth society. So this sort of dichotomous membership, for example, climate change activists versus climate change deniers, breeds in-group favoritisms and strengthens your appeal within your own tribe, often by provoking hostility against enemy tribes. For example, climate change deniers often call climate change activists radical socialists who want to destroy our country. The conspiracy theory or homophily is nothing new. What's relatively new is a combination of post-truth society and social media technology. So my high-level motivation is to provide a conceptual review of homophily and conspiracy theory in the context of social media. So first, social scientists always strive to bridge the gap between micro-level interaction, let's say individual free will to choose who to form ties with or what source of information to consume, to macro-level phenomenon, for example, social structures like race, gender, religion, etc., and complex collective social behaviors, for example, polarization. Homophily and conspiracy theory fit into those lines of research. Second, we are witnessing a seismic paradigm shift in social science research. In the analog age, conspiracy theory followers are perhaps your family members, your neighbors, co-workers, people who you share concrete social relationships with. In the digital era, however, online social interactions turn conspiracy theory groups into imagined communities, if you will, in which people share more abstract identity or membership. Human behaviors in online social networks have generated a treasure trove of data. Actions like, following, sharing, like, and conversations, contextual content, emojis, memes. In a nutshell, there is a lot of opportunities for empirical research. So based on a survey of the literature, we propose a domain general conceptual model that is applicable to specific problem areas. So there are three building blocks of homophily and conspiracy theory. Put differently, three different phases of engagement. So the first component is a relational structural component, social connections and association. That is a tendency to establish social connections and different diffusion patterns. The second component is a descriptive explanatory component, which consists of cognitive processes such as describing psychological and emotional traits, i.e. reflection, and developing alternative worldviews, that is exploration. The last component is a predictive prescriptive component, such that group members perceive a set of behaviors as stereotypical and act accordingly. I'm going to elaborate each component a little bit in the following slides. So first, a relational structural component. So how does a conspiracy theory go viral on social media? There are basically two content diffusion paradigms. So the left schema is a shallow, broadcast-like, a single large source diffusion by which mass media or traditional propaganda or marketing campaigns rely on. The right schema is a deep cascade, like by cascade, I mean a consecutive series of reshares viral diffusion through a multi-generation person-to-person contagion process, so to speak. So in many Web 2.0 sites and or applications, a viral conspiracy theory grows out of a limited number of early followers who share it with friends or acquaintances with similar information consumption patterns, and so on. So a cascade of reshares substantially enlarges the group size. On top of that, millions of online fake personas, like bots and trolls, swiftly circulate the sheer volume of misinformation and disinformation. As to descriptive and explanatory framework, a conspiracy theory is, among many other things, a cognitive artifact. An opinion conspiracy theory showcases remarkable storytelling skills and entertainment values. A conspiracy theory often has a dual nature, explanatory dimension of unifying explanations and a behavioral dimension of actions. Humans have two general systems of thinking. System one is, intuitive thinking, gut feelings, hunch, etc., versus system two, which is deliberative analytic thinking. So not only does conspiracy theory describes, but also explains complex problems like climate change in a way that our system one is well attuned to. Conspiracy theory also appeals to pathos and emotional reasoning. It leads to real world outcomes in terms of diffusion, polarization, and mental health issues. Back to Pizzagate, perhaps that QAnon follower opened fire because he genuinely believed that he can save children, which was apparently a noble cause and a moral thing to do. And I just want to emphasize the risk of emerging technologies, namely large language models and deep fake. So large language models are quote unquote pre-trained on gigantic online corpuses like Wikipedia, 10,000s of books, etc. Many killer apps like Google, like Gmail, you may use its feature called Smart Compose, and Google Translate are powered by large language models. GPT-3 is another example that can generate human-like language with a fair bit of coherence and authenticity. Same models, if trained on massive conspiratorial content, can be repurposed to manufacture conspiracy theory at an industry scale. So recently, an AI model released on Hugging Face produces harmful, toxic, discriminatory text. It was trained on notorious websites like the image bot 4chan, which has been linked to the inception of QAnon and a series of domestic terrorist attacks. And deepfake is an AI technology capable of generating high fidelity celebrity videos. Just imagine a scenario of those technologies working in tandem. So naive actors harness GPT to compose a conspiracy theory and then leverage deepfake to fabricate a celebrity parroting that conspiracy theory. Social media dramatically increases its virality through, likes and share. So social media provides a technological underpinning that is as empowering as it is disruptive. What particularly intrigues me is the manifestation of homophily and conspiracy theory on social media, namely echo chambers and filter bubbles, often curated by algorithms. Perspectives, interpretations, and narratives get reinforced and amplified through repeated interactions with somewhat homogeneous users or content. For instance, the left figure shows that climate change activists, those green dots, prefer to interact with other climate change activists. The same group dynamics hold true for climate change skeptics, those red dots. As a result, they form their on echo chambers, i.e. highly clustered online communities in the climate change discourse. So on a slightly positive note, a growing body of empirical evidence suggests that echo chambers and filter bubbles might be overblown. I mean, a cat lover is unlikely to go full QAnon just simply by watching a whole bunch of video clips recommended by YouTube. Instead, conspiracy theory followers are more likely to be driven by some pre-existing biases rather than algorithms, and seek only confirmation online. So this rabbit hole metaphor may be exaggerated. We definitely need more algorithm auditing down the road to have a more nuanced understanding of algorithms' role in shaping echo chambers and filter bubbles. So one interesting direction would be to study how to introduce serendipity under this context. Serendipity is almost synonymous with diversity. I mean, perhaps social media's recommender systems sometimes can suggest users different from the users you are following now, or suggest content somewhat different from the types of content you are normally consuming. Obviously, that could be a business strategy for platforms. So, so this is the end of my presentation. I wrap it up a little bit earlier, so I have, some time for questions or comments. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Yisheng. That was very interesting. I know I have some questions for you, but I'll open the floor and see if anyone else would like to take this opportunity first.
I have also questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Yeah, I have maybe there are stupid questions, but could you actually explain what you really call conspiracy theory? I mean, where is this threshold kind of for you? Because yeah, what is a conspiracy theory?
So I get obviously
how would you explain this? And also, I have a question: how massive is this? What is the percentage of people involved in that?
So to your first question, obviously there are many different definitions of conspiracy theory, but to me, after literature review, I found the hallmark of conspiracy theory is to ascribe a grand cause to some complex social problems or social phenomena. So basically, conspiracy theory often dramatically simplify or falsely ascribe a causal relationship to many ground social issues. So I think that's a very simple definition of a conspiracy theory, and may draw some lines between conspiracy theory and some general misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah, there's a problem about the threshold between populism and conspiracy theory, because populism is actually also trying to do that. It's kind of, populists usually explain very complicated problems with very simple solutions. And yeah, but conspiracy theory, it's like populism on the extreme level, right? But at the same time, when you look at them, they look like maybe there is a breach between them, but they are kind of completely different, right? There's
of course.
Anyway, there is a gap between them, right?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. Yes.
And what is do you have any statistics about how many people believe in these?
I think it comes down to specific conspiracy theories, but honestly speaking, I don't have a number at my hand, but I can look at for example, anti-vaccine conspiracy theory or election denial conspiracy theory or climate change related conspiracy theory. But of course, there are lots of statistics you can find. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Because I guess there's also could be a bias because the people who actually support conspiracy theory, maybe they're kind of I don't know, we pay more attention to them, and maybe they appear in some media more frequently. Like, you know, it's very hard to estimate the actual impact of these people and how many of them.
Actually, I can
Yeah.
post a link in our chat window. Maybe that could partly answer your question. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a very interesting topic.
Thank you.
Yes, I hate to horn in on this discussion between our panelists, but we are at time for our first presentation. So perhaps we can pick this up at the end. So we can move on to our second presentation by Alice Huang. Alice is a PhD candidate in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Toronto. She is interested in social and formal epistemology, as well as the application of computational methods to philosophical reasoning. She also enjoys thinking about metaphysics and things related to the nature of consciousness. Alice, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen now. Great. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and start. So my presentation is on homophily and the meta-expertise of experts. By meta-expertise, I mean the ability to identify experts. So first, just a bit of background. Probably everyone already knows this, but just so we get started. Our society is roughly organized in such a way that each person only has to focus on a specific area and sort of find out the truth in that area. And then through exchanges of our findings, we can together as an organized society know more than we would have been able to if we have to independently work on these things. So for example, I rely on the knowledge of medical experts, on engineers, so that if I had to figure these things out on my own, I wouldn't have been able to, or I have to take a very long time. So that's how it works in the modern society. Now, the problem arises that if I'm not an expert and there are experts who have sort of contradicting advice, how would I know who the real experts are, or which expert is telling me more accurate things? So for instance, at the beginning of the pandemic, some experts are saying that we don't have to wear masks, that masks don't really work with coronaviruses like COVID-19. Some experts say that they do. So since I know nothing about coronaviruses, how would I know who to listen to? That's sort of the big picture problem that my project is sort of a part of. So one very first reaction could be that, okay, let's look at the track records of these two supposed experts and see who in the past has been saying the right things. So then we could sort of infer inductively that, okay, if in the past A has been saying the right things, then probably today she's saying the right things as well. The problem is actually, it's not really realistic for a lay person to sort of, well, first of all, how would this record be available to me as a layperson? Even publications are just a very small subset of things that this putative expert supposedly believes. And secondly, even if I do get my hands on enough track records to make the judgments, I wouldn't be able to assess the track records precisely because I don't have the expertise. So I wouldn't be able to judge whether or not the past research, say, of this epidemiologist has been good, has been rigorous, because, well, I just don't know anything about epidemiology. So since that's a bit too ideal, we retrieve to the next step where we say, okay, we have in the society these sort of systems in place to facilitate that, right? So we have some people being more reputable than others. We have these certifications. So these are sort of broadly construed a system of recognition where some putative expert might be more recognized than others. And that is supposed to give us clues on whose advice we should listen to, who has more accurate beliefs. And now the question then is, how does this sort of system of recognition emerge such that it tracks genuine expertise? And what I'm going to do in this project is I will use an agent-based simulation model to examine one way in which this sort of structure emerges. And actually, we don't need anything fancy, ideal like track records. We just need a specific type of homophily. So the specific type of homophily that I am interested in is opinion-based homophily. So there are different kinds of in-group preferences. For instance, we prefer, say, to interact with people of the same racial ethnicity groups, or we have this preference of interacting with the same social class, things like that. But the particular kind of homophily that I'm interested in is opinion-based. In other words, I will decide who I trust based on how close our opinions are. And at first sight, this seems like a very bad benchmark, because if you're only going to trust people who have similar opinions as you, how are you going to learn anything? So this sort of like, you might doubt in the beginning, like, oh, what is this kind of strategy? So to just give a more intuitive idea of how that is, say, let's take like a situation that probably similar situations have occurred to everyone. So for example, you have a uncle who one day tells you, oh, you know what? I'm sure that the earth is flat. So you're like, okay. And then the next day the uncle comes again and he's like, I just read this article on Reddit saying that climate change is not anthropogenic. It's all a huge conspiracy by the government to take down the modern society, something like that. Then you're like, you remember that like 1 week ago, your uncle told you that he believes in flat earth. So now you're like, okay, I'm going to trust my uncle less, and I'll just like take what he says lightly. So this is sort of a more like relatable situation where you're like, oh, actually the closeness of opinion provides some kind of guidance to how seriously you should take the subsequent opinions or beliefs of this person. So that's like a real life case. We could also bring this case into more specifically a community of investigators, researchers, scientists, and so forth. So here I'm putting 2 quotes of a paper by O'Connor and Weatherall in 2017 on how this sort of opinion-based homophily is a driving factor for polarization. But yet it's somewhat justifiable. So I'm just going to really quickly read out the quotes. So the first one says, the idea here is that as a responsible scientist, Jill must assess the reliability of the evidence produced by her colleagues. There are many ways in which she might attempt to do this, but one plausible heuristic is to evaluate the reliability of the evidence on the basis of her perception of Ian's past epistemic success. Now, Jill's own beliefs are her clearest guide to evaluating whether Ian has succeeded in forming reliable beliefs. And so in cases where their beliefs differ, Jill supposes that Ian must be less reliable. So this is sort of the similar case, but applied to scientists, or like a context of investigation. Furthermore, while we do not claim that employing this heuristics is individually rational, we do claim that it is justifiable and that similar heuristics are widespread. Indeed, it is essential to a scientific practice that scientists make judgments concerning the reliability of other scientists' work and condition their beliefs accordingly. So in this project, they're saying like, okay, this is sort of a justifiable heuristics. However, it leads to bad results such as polarization. But I'm going to look at how this sort of simple heuristic allows a sort of structure of recognition to emerge that sort of aggregates the wisdom of crowd. So a bit of an outline of the project, I study an agent-based model with agents who choose who they trust and accord recognition to purely based on similarity of opinions. So you can sort of imagine these agents forming a network. Each node is an agent, and then there's an edge or an arrow going from agent A to B if A judges B to be trustworthy or reliable. And then given that this network, using metrics of centrality in network theory, we can study the structure of this network and identify which agents are the most central based on this mechanism of homophily. So then you could see whether or not the structure that emerges in this network, the most central agents who supposedly should be interpreted as the most recognized agents or agents with most prestige end up also having more accurate beliefs. So I investigate two variations of the model. In the first model, if an agent judges the other to be trustworthy, they also update their own beliefs based on what this trusted agent believes. So based on the testimony of this agent's research. On the other hand, you can imagine a world where each agent only does their own research. However, they still read the research of other people and sort of judge them based on how similar their research results are to their own. So those are sort of two kinds of models we can investigate with testimony updates and without testimony updates. And I will present an optimistic result from studying this model and a worrisome consequence. And then just to give a little bit more details, in the simulation, the task is to estimate a coin bias. And the evidence comes in the form of flipping this coin. So for example, we will simulate flipping a coin with 0.7 bias to heads. So at each time step, the agents will receive a coin flip. And this is supposed to model, for instance, a problem where we want to know the efficacy of a vaccine. And so then the sort of coin bias is representing the efficacy, the true efficacy of the vaccine, whereas the coin flips are representing the sampling or the individual trials based on this vaccine. So agents in the simulation have very diverse cognitive strategies. And this is very important because if agents are not diversified in their cognitive strategy, then the issue of asking which experts, putative experts to trust doesn't arise because everyone's the same, so to speak. So agents in the model differ in three ways mainly. The first is their independent accuracy. So if each agent in the model works alone, how accurate can they form? Can their beliefs be? The second aspect is open-mindedness. So each agent chooses who they trust based on similarity, but some could be more generous, so to speak. So some could trust a lot of agents, and some would be more frugal in only trusting those who have very, very similar opinions. And then finally, in the first variation, where agents not only judge each other, but also update their beliefs on the testimony of those who they trust, they update both on the data, which is the coin flip that they get, and also the testimony of those who they trust. So the third way in which agents can be diverse from each other is the weight they put on the data they collect versus the weight they put on the testimony of people they trust. These are several ways where agents in the model are different. So then the simulation goes, in each run, there are 30 agents. So that's like a community of researchers. They go through 300 time steps. At each time step, they flip the coin once and they receive information on the opinions of other agents. And then they update their beliefs about the ultimate coin bias, or think about the efficacy of COVID vaccine, for instance, based on their respective cognitive strategy. And then at each time step, their accuracy is assessed. So that's assessed by the Breyer score. If you are not familiar with it, it doesn't really matter. It's sort of a measure of accuracy, as well as their centrality. So here I use 5 different measures of centrality in network theory. I won't go into the details just because it's supposed to be interdisciplinary and I don't have that much time. But if you're interested, I'm happy to talk more about it. And so then we can determine at each stage of the inquiry whether or not the structure that emerges is such that the most central agents also have the most accurate beliefs. And here are the results. So we want to ask, how well does centrality or the recognition in the community predict how accurate their beliefs are? So here the accuracy is actually measured by inaccuracy. So the more the higher your Breyer score, the more inaccurate you are. And here each graph is a measure, uses a different measure of centrality in network theory. So it's not really important. The most important thing is to see sort of the general trend that the y-axis shows the average R values. And basically, the closer your R value is to 1 or -1, the stronger the correlation is. And if it's negative, it means that it's a negative correlation. So across 300 time steps, we could see that the sort of correlation between recognition and how accurate beliefs are sort of stabilizes after about 100, 150 time steps, and stabilizes at around -0.7, which is usually considered a pretty strong correlation. So this shows that the sort of structure that emerges from a homophilic mechanism of choosing who to trust is the correlation is pretty strong between recognition and accuracy. And so we could also look at 3 different cases. So there's the good case where here again, you could see that the more central the agents are, the more accurate their beliefs end up being. That's in the good case, the correlation is very strong, as you can see. Then there's the harmless case where the correlation generally holds, except for 1 or 2 agents that are actually not central. So they're sort of marginalized. However, they have stronger, they have more accurate beliefs than the mainstream agents. But I call this the harmless case because that individual agent, let's call the agent the anomaly. The anomaly is only slightly more accurate than the mainstream and central agents, which means that if you still follow the heuristics of just listening to whoever the most recognized or most reputable agent is, it comes only at a very small cost of accuracy. So in the harmless cases, it's still a pretty good and effortless heuristics for the lay people to trust the experts. And then finally, there are the bad cases where the correlation just doesn't hold. So this is sort of a failure of recognition to track accuracy. And so the good cases and the harmless cases together form about 95% of the trials, which I think is a pretty good optimistic result, although whether or not 5% risk of missing the accurate truth is too high for a layperson will sort of depend on the context of the inquiry, right? So I don't want to make a strong claim being like you should always do that. So another thing is that in the bad cases, I noted about the time. Another thing is that in the bad cases, the anomalies, also in the harmless cases, so the anomalies are actually agents who don't really take into account other people's opinions. So they sort of just like work on their own and they have very high independent accuracy. And I just want to point out that in fact, in reality, that's a very, very rare case given our current model of scientific investigation. That's usually by groups or by a whole laboratory. And also that investigating solely on your own comes at a much higher cost than it does with a group. So it's not really clear that in reality, these cases do arise. So that's the good result. I think I'm going to just skip this part. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to go back. This is sort of, in the end, that's the network structure that emerges. But since I don't have any time left, I'm going to just skip quickly. So then, earlier I said that I look at 2 different variations, one with testimony, one where they just judge, but they don't take into account others' opinions. These are sort of the 2 different results. And you could probably, well, it would be interesting if you want to guess, but since I don't have time, I'm just going to tell you the answer. So on the left-hand side, it's where people just judge each other. On the right-hand side, it's where there is communications between agents and they take into account each other's opinions. And the color of the nodes denote how independently accurate they are. So the darker the color is, the more inaccurate the lower their ability is independently, so to speak. So then you could see that there's actually a problem of imposters, where if agents communicate with each other, more agents who wouldn't have been able to arrive at the correct answer or the truth end up enjoying the same recognition and forming the same accurate beliefs as the mainstream group of accurate investigators, even though if they had been alone, they wouldn't have been able to do it. And this might generally not be a problem for a layperson, because you could still just follow the mainstream people. It doesn't matter if these scientists would not have been able to independently arrive at the truth. But it becomes problematic in situations where individual scientists' voices or opinions are amplified. So for example, if there's a new finding on COVID-19, the journalist wants to interview a scientist and be like, okay, so what do you think about, what's your judgment of this new finding? The journalist wouldn't be able to tell who are the scientists who are able to independently form accurate opinions. So they might just like pick the wrong person, pick the imposter, and then that's gonna have bad consequences. So just to wrap up, there's the optimistic takeaway where homophily enables a kind of aggregation of crowd wisdom. It's a simple mechanism that allows recognition to track accuracy. But there's also the worry where when there is also homophily-based testimonial exchanges, there are imposters sort of in the mainstream scientists. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much. I'm probably a bit over time. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Alice. And we can move on to our final presentation of this session by Alexander Brechelov. Alexander is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Donnelly Center and the University of Toronto. Before that, he obtained his PhD in experimental molecular biology and bachelor's in industrial biotechnology. Alexander has also studied chemical engineering and computational biology. With his interdisciplinary experience, Alexander works at the intersection of molecular biology and machine learning, focusing on the development of new methods that can facilitate research in biology and medicine. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you for introduction. And I want to say thank you for this opportunity to share my work with you, our project. Today I'm going to talk about Journal Advisor, an OP tool for scientific document analysis. So actually, have you ever wondered how many scientific papers are published every year? Because I know that there are a lot of papers published like almost every day. There's probably thousands of them. And so actually the number is about a few millions of scientific papers are published every year now. And this number is increasing exponentially every year. So you see here this very obvious trend, and there are also data from Archive and bioRxiv, the biggest preprint servers, and they also detect that there are a lot of papers, and every year it's kind of accelerating process of like increasing number of the published scientific articles. So this number is always increasing, and the question is how it's increasing. First of all, of course, there are new type of journals which don't have printed paper-based version, and because of that, they actually can publish almost as many papers as they want to, because they don't have, like, they have only electronic version, so you I guess you know +1 in scientific reports. They are these massive journals. This is kind of new model, but there are also the number of journals also increasing every year, and so like right now there are about thousands of scientific journals in all around the world, and many of them that we can actually read the articles in English, but at the same time, for me, all this situation looks like it reminds me iceberg, because of course we know many journals like which are kind of scientific magazines. Yeah, everybody knows that Nature, Science, Cell, these journals, but at the same time there are thousands and thousands of journals which are maybe they are specific for some particular topic, or they probably don't have a high impact factor yet, and that's why we kind of actually ignoring them when we're trying to submit our paper. Yeah, and so my question is, where are you going to publish your paper when you got to the point, and how to choose the right journal? And so we were discussing this question with my colleague and friend Anastasia. Actually, it was like that: how to choose the relevant journal. And I know a few journals that my supervisor likes, but I guess we should create a program for this. And yeah, based on neural network. Then, so that's how we actually came to idea to create a AI-based algorithm that can recommend the relevant journal for your publication, and can also help with the submission, create maybe or suggest appropriate title for your paper, maybe suggest reviewers and find related papers. And that's how we created our project, which we call Journal Advisor. So as I said, the Journal Advisor is actually AI-based algorithm, so it's a neural network. And you know that neural network needs a lot of data for training. So we decided to create our own data set based on PubMed. So we downloaded a lot of papers from PubMed. It was, I guess, over 8 million of papers from over 4,000 journals. But we also put some requirements. So we filtered this database. First of all, we wanted to use only the recent papers for the last 5 years, and the journal should publish the papers also in the last year, so it wasn't like, you know, it's like a live, not posted journal. There should be at least 300 papers from this journal for this over 5 years, and also we put some restriction about the language, only abstracts in English. We took only abstracts in English, and journals which actually print papers in English, or at least they can print papers in English as well. And we tried to be as much inclusive about journals as we could. Of course, we have some biases towards English-speaking countries, and you know that United States and UK, they have a few very big publishers, but they're also in our data set. We have a lot of papers almost from every continent, and from European countries, Australia, and a lot of papers from Brazil and China and India. So we tried to be as much diverse as we could, and we didn't filter our data set based on any performance metrics like impact factor of SGR score. So yeah, here you can see on this plot that what I was talking about. There are like a few journals who are like actually magazines, scientific magazines, and this is this part of the iceberg which is above the water, and there's like a lot of journals with impact factor like I don't know, less than 10, and even sometimes less than even 1. But we tried to keep them all, and so our data set finally included, as I said, over 6 million papers or abstracts and over 4,000 journals. And we also tried to collect some metadata about these journals. So yeah, some performance metric, publish information, also links to the official site, and even for some journals we collected some approximate price for the publication. And then we started working with this data set. We chosen the neural network, the model for our tool. We chosen distilled bark from Hugging Face, and technically it's a transformer-based model, and which consists of encoder and decoder, 2 main parts. And so in our case, as an input for this model, we actually send the abstract of the paper to the encoder, and encoder trying to extract meaning from the abstract and encapsulate it in a feature vector, and then send this feature vector to the decoder part. And the decoder part is actually doing the reverse process. So from the feature vector, it's trying to build the actual language, the actual text. In our case, it's a title of the paper. And also, we put another head for this neural network, which can predict the journal from which this abstract in this paper was taken from. So we trained this model, and it was one neural network for 2 tasks. One task is title prediction, or it's actually technically it's language modeling. Another task is a journal prediction, so it's a technical classification. And you can see here that during the training process, along the training process, our accuracy about prediction, the journal was increasing almost to 20%. So it means like out from 4,000 journals, every 5th time our model could predict journal correctly. And with title accuracy, it's also kind of, because our model was pre-trained, it actually fine-tuned very fast, and then actually didn't lose the accuracy in the title prediction. So we trained this model, and then we launched that to the website, and let me show what it can do. I hope it works. Can you see, guys, the website? If you say something, somebody, can you see the website?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so yeah, this is a homepage of Journal Advisor. So let's take this paper as an example. It's Cell 2014, and it's actually, it wasn't in our data set. White short, I'm sorry. White short abstract, and you can see push analyze, and there are results. So that's a title that our neural network suggested for this paper. You can also share this in social media, and I will appreciate if you do this, guys. And there is another result, is a recommended journal. So we suggest about 100 mostly relevant journals. You can see 50 of them on this plot. So this is impact factor of the journal and the relevance score. And you can play a little bit with this dots. So this is a cell, and yeah, this is a good paper from the Cell of 2014. So our model actually suggests a lot of molecular biology journals, and you can also kind of take a better look, or if you're interested in particular publisher, you can actually choose the publisher, because sometimes some universities have like a special offer from the particular publisher. And here in the table you can see a little more information about every journal, and you can see actual 100 top 100 suggested or relevant journals. So you can go to the it's a direct link to the website, and also like you can check the impact factor. Yes, and there's the information. So also you can check our database and information that's in our database that we used on our website. So that's the point where we are now with this project. I'm sorry, because yeah, that's where we are now with this project, and please use this, and I will appreciate if you give some feedback. We have a contact on the website, but what else we can do with this algorithm actually? I guess we can do semantic search, because what Journal Advisor does is Journal Advisor extracting meaning from the abstract and trying to represent it as a feature vector of 1000 features. And so our previous work and actually on the microscopy analysis, it showed that in this system, the papers which have like a similar abstracts or similar papers, actually, technically, yeah, they're gonna have a similar feature vectors. And so based on this, we can actually compare different papers. And so here you can see the UMAP, or yeah, it's kind of yeah, that's a representation of about 150,000 papers from our data set. Each dot, the dots are very, very small and faint, but each dot is representing one paper, and the color of the dot is corresponded to the particular journal. So you can see that there are some kind of islands, and these islands, they are actually some topics in the field. For example, this island is plant biology and plant genetics, and you can see also this blue color. It's science, because science is multidisciplinary journal, so it's kind of presented in many topics, but at the same time you can see that many journals, they kind of specific for particular topics. And so that's what we're working on right now, and we're gonna implement this also online. So based on our representations, we can find the most, like, the closest paper to your abstract, and based on that we also can suggest that the professors or like authors from the closest paper, they could be the better reviewers for your paper, right? And so right now, as a conclusion, right now, our journal advisor already can recommend relevant journal. It also facilitates submission in some way because it's easier to choose the journal, and also journal advisor is not biased towards any of the publishers. So like we try to collect all the publishers from all the countries as we could. Journal advisor can create title for your paper, and in the future we're gonna implement suggesting reviewers and find related papers. And I want to say thank you to my collaborator Anastasia Rozdybedina, and we're affiliated to Donnelly Center, and Anastasia also affiliated to Vector Institute. There is our website, and this is QR code for our website. So please use it, and you're welcome. And I'm looking forward to hear back from you or get some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Now that we've gone through all our presentations, I guess we'll open the floor for question period. If you have something you want to ask, I'll ask that you raise your hand or post it in the chat window, just so we don't run into problems of multiple people trying to talk at once. I guess I'll start with a question for Alexander that's been posted in the chat window from Donald Wilson. He asked, did your journal advisor pick up predatory journals, or were you able to distinguish these? And if so, how did these show on your metrics?
Yeah, it could. It probably contains some predatory journals. We didn't filter for that. And yeah, but it's also a question, what do you call predatory journal? Because yeah, but theoretically, yeah, it can.
Okay, fair enough. Just looking at some of the questions we've archived from earlier, we've got one for Yisheng from Tomaso, and he asks, which further research paths would you define to better understand the weight of algorithms in conspiracy theories and echo chamber phenomena?
So I guess I would say probably it's using some randomized online experiments, but again I'm not an expert in that field, so I guess yeah. So that's my guess. Yeah.
Okay. And a second question for Yisheng from Michael. And he writes, thank you for this presentation. Have you or others identified issues, views, or beliefs that are shared by otherwise opposed groups, such as climate change deniers and those who believe in climate change? Could building out from issues, views, or beliefs shared in common be one way of trying to bridge otherwise polarized groups? In other words, what are the areas of homophily between opposed groups, and could this be leveraged for societal good?
Yeah, I can quickly think of 2 points. I guess the first point is, the strength of weak ties. We all know that many people know that Mark Granovetter's similar paper, The Strength of Weak Ties. So yeah, that's for me, that's one possible direction to identify some bridge nodes in the social network of, let's take climate change, for example. So some bridge nodes which can connect both climate change activists and climate change deniers. Maybe we can somewhat leverage those loads for for some I guess some mitigation strategies. So the second point being that which is also one of my future research directions to identify intersectional homophily. Let's say if people are more interested in vaccine-related conspiracy theory, are they also more likely to believe, let's say, climate change related conspiracy theory? Yeah. So I hope that helps. Yeah.
Okay, and here's one for Alice, again from Michael. If you used your findings to train AI, would the AI's results of guessing outcomes be better or worse than human beings?
Thanks for the question. So right now the model is it's a simulation model. So I'm not really training the model with data, so to speak. I'm making certain assumptions, being like, okay, if this is how individual decision process works, how does that individual decision process emerge into a larger structure? Like, so I'm trying to gauge the community level or societal level phenomenon based on the individual level decision. So I'm not really sure how that would map onto how I could use a similar model, but training it with data using artificial intelligence. So if you have a thought in mind how that would work, I would love to hear that. What I have, like, when I read the question, what I had in mind was, so one very sort of similar mechanism, you might say, is the mechanism of citation. So you sort of, when you're writing your paper, you're citing a lot of studies that supposedly are studies that you find rigorous and trustworthy, and you want to use them to sort of support your results. So this citation network sort of is a little bit similar, but as we know, there's a lot of citation biases. So like results, I think there was a quite well-known study that says that results that are not replicable are actually more cited than results that are replicable. So citation is obviously not a good way to track rigor in research. And also you could cite papers and criticize that paper. So the more cited you are, which means you end up being the more central person in the network, doesn't exactly track having better research in that case. But I could imagine a sort of similar model where you collect data on, I guess, how each individual researcher, and then we could run the similar model, network model, and identify like which researchers' result best aggregate the kind of crowd wisdom or like the consensus of the community. So I can imagine that being a case. But yeah, I think I would be interested to hear what you have in mind when you say training the model with AI.
Michael, did you want to clarify your question?
Yes. Thanks so much for the answer. I'm a neophyte when it comes to training AI or machine learning. I'm more interested in the potential policy implications of these technologies. So I'm really interested in the work that's going on, and appreciate this forum. Thanks.
And one other brief question for Alice from Sarah. She just wonders, have you published this work, and if it is available somewhere?
No, so it's currently under review, but I'm happy to send a draft of the paper if you like. If you wanna email me, is the email on the program somewhere? I don't know. Yeah, or you could send me a message. I'll send it to you. But I appreciate the interest.
I also have a question for Alice. Maybe I missed it, but in your model you have kind of a lot of variables, and there is also a question about the kind of 0 point, right? Because it's interesting how the 0 point and your suggestions, how they're gonna influence the result, right?
Sorry, what's the second thing? I didn't get that. Did you say the 0 point? My audio was off for a second.
Yeah, like how do you make your like model? Like is there a 0 point and then you run through the 300 time steps, and so you kind of get some stable right?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get into details because I didn't have time in the presentation, but I actually also did two versions of it. First is that each agent starts with no belief at all, so to speak. So each starts with a uniform prior. So they don't have any prior beliefs about what the coin bias is supposed to be, or like what vaccine efficacy, if we want to use a real life case, is supposed to be. I also ran a model where they start, so at the beginning, they already have randomly generated prior beliefs. So in that case, one would think that in the random case, the result of homophily would be worse, because in the beginning, you're limited in how much you can learn from other people, just because you're starting in the beginning, you're already collecting information from a very small, limited group of people that are similar to you. And it turns out that actually very quickly, even when you start with random prior, the results are almost basically the same. So yeah, so it's quite, I like that bit a lot, because it shows that it's like quite realistic. The starting with random prior is more realistic than starting with no belief, because everyone starts their investigation with some preconception of what the results are going to be like, but it still holds. I don't know if that was your question, but that's just like an additional point about like the starting point of the simulation.
Yeah.
Okay, I see Yisheng has his hand raised. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh yeah, I have a quick question for Alice as well. So maybe you touched upon this point in your presentation. If I missed it, apologies first. So have you spotted any, clear, because you use agent-based modeling, right? Have you spotted any clear segregation patterns, so to speak, in your research?
Yeah, definitely. So actually my model is quite similar to the same model that O'Connor and Weatherall used to establish results about polarization. So the model was it's quite similar in that it's both homophily based model, and they use a very similar model to establish that is sort of a driving factor for polarization on topics when there is a clear fact. So it isn't just like polarization on value related stuff, but like polarization on, say, global warming, where you actually like have data and there's a fact of the matter on it. How come there are still scientists how come the opinion of scientists don't converge even when there is a fact of the matter and they work with data? So they sort of use a similar model to establish the results about segregation. Yeah.
And perhaps building on that, Andrew comments, it would be interesting to consider a skewed belief system where a majority tends to favor one belief over the other.
Yeah, that would be cool to test out. There are a bunch of different ways we could change the model to make it more realistic, or test different scenarios out, different other mechanisms that might be at play combined to it. So I didn't exactly do that because it complicates it a little bit too much. Plus, yeah, it doesn't fit in one paper, but that's a really cool suggestion. I will definitely keep that in mind.
Well, it's a good problem to have when things don't fit in one paper. Another question for Alexander from Donald. Says, I may have missed it as you were very quiet. For journals covering the same general topic, would your journal advisor NLP be more inclined to steer toward higher impact journals, but broader coverage, than narrower niche journals that may publish more closely to the topic of your manuscript?
We didn't check that, and our model definitely catch the topic and the field, but within the field, I doubt that it's very good into the distinguishing between high impact and low impact journals. Yeah, it's not. I don't think that it's so precise, but we haven't tested this.
Okay. So we've now cleared our backlog of questions. So if anyone else has any to ask, fire away. While we're waiting for that, I have a question of my own just to put these different panelists in conversation with each other. So both Yisheng and Alex, you've been looking at this concept of homophily. And really what you're examining is, does this affect the accuracy of people's beliefs? So your object of examination is belief accuracy. And usually when people try to study a phenomenon, they have to designate cases of its presence or absence, which in your case would mean designating some beliefs as accurate or inaccurate. But doing so seems to presume your own epistemic accuracy when your theory provides reasons for being skeptical about that. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on how can researchers circumvent that sort of problem in studying the accuracy of beliefs.
Well, I can go. So actually, since in my model it's a simulation, there isn't exactly that problem. So because I simply, in designing the simulation, I designate what the truth is. But I think it's a very good question, because even though my sort of conclusion is pretty optimistic, being like, oh yeah, this is a new justification for us to trust the mainstream opinion. I think in reality, there are much more factors that is a bit dangerous, so to speak, like funding and like journalistic practices also skew sort of what we think of as truth. So a very, very famous example is the tobacco industry. If you just selectively amplify studies that sort of cast doubts on the effects of tobacco on health, then you create this sort of perception of like, oh, actually things are more uncertain than it really is. So yeah, I think, to answer your question, my thought would be that I don't think there is a way. I think we just do our best. I think empirically, I've been thinking about this question. I don't really think there is a way. So I'd be excited to hear if Ishan has a better idea of how, as researchers, that can be achieved.
Unfortunately, I don't think I have a better idea, but I just want to quickly echo Alice's point. So like tobacco industry or like oil companies, they sometimes deliberately fund so-called contrarian, research, playing devil's advocate, so they can claim, oh, wait a minute, there is no consensus on the health effect of smoking, or there is no consensus on climate change. It's controversial. Let's don't jump into any conclusions. That sort of thing. So this is a tactic called the manufacture of doubt, so often by political or vested interest group. Yeah, and another thing is because during my literature review, so I think one common critique of homophily, especially in the context of social media, is that nowadays, for example, maybe within the computational social science research communities, many researchers tend to use homophily as a sort of all-encompassing umbrella term to describe everything they come across as, echo chamber, that's homophily, or filter bubble, that's homophily, or polarization, that's homophily. So my next step is to come across some some rigorous measurement of homophily, especially using some more state-of-the-art computational methods. Yeah.
Right, so perhaps the concept of homophily is itself a product of homophily. We have another question for Alexander from Sharon. At what point in the manuscript writing process do you imagine your system being used? I usually try to find a journal or conference to target early in the process to format the paper around those requirements.
At any point where you have abstract or something similar to abstract, so like the short piece of text which describes what you have done, like what you've got as a result. And also for titling, of course, for suggestion journals, it's mostly for papers, but for titling and suggesting titles can be used for any kind of academic works, like for grant applications and for like theses, like any kind of academic work. And you need just an abstract. And you also, yeah, you can change the abstract and resubmit on the website. So you can kind of try to adjust your abstract to a specific journal if you're interested in that, and to see how it actually behaves.
Very interesting. And as we're waiting for more questions to come in, I'll pose another one to Alice. I'd be interested in hearing how you think, or if you think technology mediates this dynamic of subjective calibration you articulate. So you examine sort of this network structure, but would not the medium through which a network is constructed affect its dynamics? So if communication technology changes, would we expect that to alter the results of your model in a predictable way?
Well, so I can think of a couple of ways that changes. So first is, well, I think without technology, so there are actually two things at play. First is that given that we have access to all this information or evidence, we selectively only update on parts of the evidence that we want to. Or so we could basically hear the opinion of everyone, but we only take seriously the opinions that we sort of already think is trustworthy, judging that based on similarity. But there's also another different kind of dynamics of homophily where you only have access to information that from your in-group, basically. And I think that pre-technology, we still have the same problem, the latter problem, where pre-technology, we have less access to all the information. So today I could Google and go on 4chan and I'll be able to read what everyone whose opinions are far away from me, what they say. But pre-technology, if I don't have anyone around me who hold those opinions, I simply just don't have access to them. So it seems like the role that technology plays in this case doesn't directly sort of eliminate homophily. It just has a different type of different reason why homophily exists in our opinion dynamics. So that's one thing. I tend to think that, so today I was actually preparing to comment on a paper that's on a similar topic, and I was thinking, and the claim was that because of the development of technology, misinformation becomes a bigger problem. And I actually don't think that's the case. It's not that it becomes a bigger problem. It's just that it's today harder for us to, we just have too much. So the problem becomes a different one, but it's not because we're getting worse. It's not because technology makes us worse at discerning bad information. It's that the problem itself just got harder. So it sort of transformed the reason why we are subjected to these sort of social dynamics that reduces our overall accuracy. Sorry, I'm sort of like departing. I'm just like rambling random stuff. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but if you have like specific thoughts on how technology changes it, I would love to hear it. And maybe I could like address that more directly.
I don't think we have time for a thorough discussion of my beliefs on the subject, but I think there's an interesting parallel to the question Alexander was raising with what you just said, where perhaps the problem with the information environment which modern technology has created is not reducing the accuracy of beliefs, but the dilemma of finding bits of relevant information from within this sea of dross and irrelevant information. It's a question of search rather than accuracy. Since we're approaching the end of our allotted time, I believe Asmita is going to offer some closing remarks.
Yes, and if you hear a lot of construction noise, please excuse me. I live in downtown, not my fault. But thank you to all the panelists and Morgan and Vinyas for this very, very, very brilliant 2 sessions. I'll just quickly share some key takeaways or sort of conclusion of this workshop based on all the sessions that we had, all the wonderful presentations that we had. First of all, the interdisciplinarity of today's workshop was really useful. To see that technologies are pervasive and these impact the very institutions that organize our society, right? The welfare system, hospitals, nursing, education systems, our classrooms, shaping beliefs, truths in our daily lives. And in a way, this creates a sense of urgency in addressing issues that emerge out of this whole network of technologies and trust. Also, a lot of how trust within technologies will be established has to do with who owns the data is something we discussed today, right? In terms of the public or the private. And there is no clear answer, but your thoughts on regulation and thinking through the relationship between public, private, nonprofits were very helpful. Then the focus on stakeholders was interesting, especially highlighting the voices of those who are impacted by these technologies, such as patients in healthcare or caseworkers in welfare systems, and how such an approach can tell us about whether these technologies are actually empowering or disruptive or punitive or disciplining. And finally, the larger context within which technologies and trust can be understood were really illuminating. You all highlighted the complexities and tensions of the global, local, urban, rural, of race, gender, age, class, colonial legacies and surveillance, and pointed at the dangers of tech determinism to address long-standing issues of social and political systems, right? On behalf of the Schwartz Reisman Institute and the University of Toronto, thank you for attending Technologies of Trust. We hope that you will stay with us over the next 2 days as we explore an exciting series of panels during the rest of the conference. The full schedule is available on our website, which is absolutelyinterdisciplinary.com. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to also visit the SRI website and sign for SRI's mailing list to learn about the mission, research community, and also upcoming events. Speaking of which, on Thursday, just this Thursday, June 23rd, SRI will host a special all-day AI bootcamp held in conjunction with SIOE 2022. This event will take place in person at U of T's Faculty of Law and features presentations from Irene Chen, Merzey Gassimi, and Dylan Hadfield-Mennel of MIT, Joel Liebel of DeepMind, Jonathan Stray of UC Berkeley. So looks pretty interdisciplinary as well. You can learn more and register for free on the SRI website. And again, if you are a Twitter person, so do use the hashtag Toronto SRI and talk about this conference. Thanks everybody, and good luck with your future scholarly work and for everything wonderful that you're doing.